have a fantastic lineup of speakers here with us to talk about one thing that many of us have nightmares about, and that's scaling. So today we have Kellan from Etsy, Tom from Gawker, and Paul from RebelMouse to talk about how they addressed challenges around scaling, specifically around engineering teams. So they'll share their stories, have a few minutes of Q&A, and then we'll continue to mingle. So thanks again, and would like to welcome Kellan to the stage.
So first, I will say, before I got here, I had no idea what this was or what we were supposed to be talking about. So these are far from prepared remarks. And also, it's always interesting to get together with a group of CTOs. Most of us were engineers. That's how we got stuck in this, is we were good at engineering. And talk about scalability, and you're like, I know this. Oh, wait, you were talking about people. Never mind, I don't know this. So Eugenia suggested talking a little bit about the life cycle, the story, the flow. And Etsy is 8 years old. Everyone knows Etsy, yes. I don't have to make knitted stuff, or we sell knitted stuff online, rather. Actually, a lot more than that. So it's 8 years old. I got involved with the company 4 years ago, so I am far from a founding CTO. It was already a successful business when I got involved. What it wasn't was a successful engineering culture or a successful engineering platform. The original team had done a good enough job, and really a great job, to get to the point where we were healthily profitable. And we had reached a point where the site didn't have good ways of scaling anymore technically, and we didn't have good ways of releasing new features or changing. And the period when I got involved full-time, I was an advisor and a part-time employee for about a year, just over 3 years ago, and we were looking at a holiday season that we weren't going to survive. You know, we are an e-commerce site, we are a holiday season-driven business, heavily seasonal, and we didn't have a story for scaling our infrastructure. We had one big vertically scaled database. It was a custom-built thing from HP. It was a terabyte and a half of RAM, SCSI backplane, about $800,000. The next one up was significantly non-linear. And we were in a similar place with storing our photos. We had one NetApp filer. The code had been built around the idea that there was one NetApp filer. The URLs that exposed the idea that there was a single storage volume. Never expose your underlying storage solution to the outside world. You're in a world of pain. And we just didn't have a good story about what we were going to do at this point. Again, we could have spent essentially all the money to replace these two new pieces, and we were going to be back in the situation 9 months later. So what we needed and what we decided to focus on was building a culture that was good at change. I mean, the other thing that we knew is that the business we had, which was successful and profitable at that point, wasn't necessarily the business we wanted. We thought of it as a prototype for the business we would eventually be in. It was a healthy business doing $200 million a year in sales. You know, we only hold on to 3.5% of that, so it's not as large as it sounds. And we knew that our vision for the world was a little bit bigger than this. So we set out to try to build a culture around being successful at changing, largely through the necessity that we had 6 months to figure it out or we were going to be in serious trouble. And so that's sort of the backdrop for thinking about our engineering culture. And really all cultures optimize for something. And I will argue that there's only really one thing that you're successfully allowed to optimize for. And that's actually not true. There are a few. If you are a strong sales-driven organization, there is a potential that you can be an operational culture. You know, sales is a subset of an operational culture. You know, if you are in a well-understood business, possibly an operational culture. For the rest of us, anyone who's doing a startup, anyone who's trying to change the world, for example, you need to be a learning culture. And that's what we set out to build, is how do you build a learning culture? And the other thing that we were doing at this, which in some ways made it easier, in some ways made it much, much harder, is we were taking an engineering team from sort of moderate size of about 24 people, down to about 6, and up to, we have a combined product dev team of just over 200 now. And so that was sort of an interesting 3-year roller coaster that we went on. And the key piece of doing that was a few things. The most important one was realizing what our principles were and what we believed, and really baking in our principles and our belief from day one. And that was about being able to move quickly, being able to learn quickly, making it fun to be an engineer, and realizing how hard this was, and also realizing what we were doing it for. And that was the other piece that was really important, particularly in that first year when we were barely keeping the site up, was not getting caught up in what all of us wanted to do, which was use new technology. You know, we are engineers partially because we are neophiliacs. So building a culture that really celebrated the success of the business. And at that point, we said, hey, we're building a website for humans. In 2013, if you still think you're building a website, you haven't looked at your stats recently. We'll have our first mobile majority day in October. We'll be mobile majority by February of next year. So we're no longer building websites. But at that point, we were. So what did we do? Well, the first thing we did, like I said, is we had to get really crisp on who the engineers that believed in our culture were and get rid of the ones who didn't. And there were a bunch of things going on there. It wasn't like one day we walked in and be like, you believe, you don't believe, but over a fairly short period of time, we rolled over a majority of the engineering team. And then we spent 6 months hiring. And hiring is hard work, as you all know. And what we did that was a little bit different, and we only had to do it for about 6 months until we got the engine churning over. But again, this is a point where, here in New York, folks had heard of Etsy, but Etsy was not an engineering brand. Hiring in New York is hard. Hiring in New York 4 years ago was harder. You talk to people about moving to New York, for example, and they're like, that's career suicide. There are no tech companies in New York, which thankfully no one says that anymore. And now they're like, yes, New York, there's culture there. There's something other than just tech startups. So it's working out well for us. So what we did for the first 6 months is we spent Mondays hiring. Every single person on the team spent Mondays hiring, all day, every day. It was what we called our 20% program, not in the traditional Google sense of the word. And that was really important. And if you're going to build something new, you have to really invest in it. So I don't know if that's a scalable solution for other people, but for us, it was a means of how we took it seriously. The other piece that we built into the learning culture was a no assholes rule. It's easy to say this, it's hard to live it. Assholes slow down learning. Assholes slow down the spread of information. You cannot, if you are trying to learn as a culture, abide assholes. Possibly as a CEO, but I doubt it. I'm not the CEO, so from my perspective, no assholes, and we don't have an asshole CEO. There are a handful of asshole CEOs out there who make good counterpoints, Jeff Bezos, Steve Jobs, but I think they're outliers. I don't think you want to be optimizing for sociopaths in your organization. So taking hiring seriously, focus on learning, no assholes, adjust culture, focus on tooling. That was the other piece as we were starting to build an engineering culture that scaled and grew, is making sure that people had the time to turn their work into tools. As we were trying to move faster and faster and learn and iterate, and the only way to learn was to make mistakes. And we tried to make as many mistakes as fast and quickly as possible and learn as much as we could from them. So we talked about making failure cheap and easy. This was a key piece of what we were trying to do. And the way we did that is we let people build tooling. This was also the way that we encouraged people to express some of that, like, I'm an engineer, I just want to hack on stuff. It was like, that's great, you can do that over there, build tooling, make us all better, make us understand what's going on with the site more. Don't destabilize the core product. Don't work out your issues about whether or not your job is interesting on something that affects people's livelihood. So that was the other piece of it. And we talked about, the first set of tools were about building a metrics-driven culture and metrics-driven development. People talk about test-driven development. We wanted to say we were metrics-driven. A feature's not done until you can measure it. A feature's not done until you can talk about how it's performing, how it performs historically, and all of these things. So that was the culture we set out to build. And that sounds very meta to the question of, like, how do you grow an engineering team? But it was actually really key. First, because we collect a lot of metrics about our hiring, but more important, because it allowed us to go out and tell an entirely different story about building teams. We were able to go out with a story first and a values first and a principles first driven recruiting effort. We were able to start a blog that talked about the work that we do and really have that be a coherent, resonant narrative. By the way, the secret on the tech blog, which I tell everybody, so don't tell, it's a secret, is to get your tech blog running first, I ghost wrote the first year of posts. Your engineers need to feel like they're writing it. Your engineers are probably not hired because they are super good at communicating. They're also not natural storytellers, so helping them with their storytelling, eventually they get better at it. We also now hire for storytelling. We have a major writing component of all of our engineering interviews right now, particularly operations, and that feels counterintuitive to people. This is the group that we feel actually needs to be the best at communicating and is often the worst. They're also the group which is also most difficult to hire with the no asshole rule. So go figure. They are, however, rehabilitatable. And the rehabilitation is probably the other piece of growing and scaling a team now that we're up sort of at this mumble north of 200 area is we moved from having our culture make sure we got the right people to really trying to focus on letting people develop in their own roles to having a really fully formed L&D program. And I think that learning and development is something you can't start early enough. is really, and for us, there were a few things that we did to start it. Now we actually have a full-time coordinator. But what we started when we were still small is, look, at contributing to open source is part of your career. It's part of your work here. Blogging is part of your work here, and speaking at conferences is part of your work here, and we will help you do all of those things at least once a year. I will work with you, we will review the code, we will train you for speaking, we will have speaking classes, you are required to do this. And that helped a lot of people both feel better about their work, but also helped them improve and develop their skills. And those communication skills and those reputations both help you with your recruiting, obviously, but also just make them better at communicating, because fundamentally, software development is a complex, disorganized social process, and the people who are better at communicating are the people who are better at it. And also the people who embrace those ideas are either overly focused on their own personal brands, which you see as kids these days, or the people who are going to go on to be your natural leaders. You know, the people who understand the service nature of leadership, understand the service nature of management, people who can bring clarity to the role. So that was a long ramble, blank faces. I have no idea how I'm doing on time. Like I said, this was starting out. We could do questions now. We could keep doing, how am I doing on time? Great. So, any questions?
You were recruited on Monday. What does that mean?
Yeah, so what it meant was, like I said, every single person in the company, we blocked it off the time. You are reading resumes, you are calling phone screens, you are doing interviews, you're doing pair programming after work with people. It is understood that 20% of all the time is on recruiting. And we could say that. In fact, we did say that, and it didn't happen. Because there's features, there's bugs, there's meetings, there's this. And so we're like, all right, Mondays. So everything that you do around recruiting, sourcing, all of those things, we just did them. Like I said, we only did that for 6 months, but it gave us sort of the clarity around the practice. It also meant that everyone was in that mindset on the same day, and we could develop a whole language around it and sort of goals and processes, a set of values that we hire for. We have sort of a checklist that we stole from Cheeseburger and swapped out sort of more of the lull-worthy versions. So yeah, but it meant that we had a dialogue about it. Everyone's mind was in the same place on the same day.
You have a cultural stance on meetings?
We have a cultural stance on meetings that I'm losing right now. And there's an interesting inflection point that happens in a culture, and we're in a bad place with it right now. Yeah, I think meetings are awful, and we say it aggressively, and I tell engineers that they can aggressively not go to meetings. And I've been trying to analyze why it's been getting so much worse recently, and I sort of reached and looking at the data. The great thing about Google App Engines and being the administrator for your app for domains is you can pull all the data. The other great thing, by the way, is you can delete everything from everyone's calendar, which I haven't done yet, but it's coming soon. And so it reached an inflection point. I've got some data in Mathematica that I've been playing with, and it looks like at about the point when your team, the chance that any 3 people on your team can randomly have a conversation drops below about 60%. You start scheduling meetings to have casual conversations with people, and then the problem goes geometric from there. So I think that you have to be really aggressive early on. And certainly one of the things that we've done over the last year, and I don't mean to throw any product developers under the bus, but one of the things we did over the last year is we hired a product management org, really for the first time. And I think that we were not aggressive enough in tracking sort of meeting increase, and we hit that inflection point, and now we're in a bad place. Yeah. But I think technology can solve this problem, but I'm paid to think that. Yeah.
Can you talk a bit more about how you evaluate candidates for storytelling ability?
Sure. There are a couple of different things. One, there are 2 key questions in the interview that are a little bit about your communication, and they're partially your under pressure, and they're partially your ability to talk through the thing. There are a handful of variations of it. My favorite is a debugging question where there is just like, this is happening, there is no right answer. Just like, what do you do next, and what do you do next, and what do you do next? The other one, like I said, is there are essay questions. And so your ability to sort of answer those essay questions and sort of with clarity and thoughtfulness is a key piece of it. It's not just about the right answer.
You do that on site, or
what?
You do that on site? That's
homework. Yeah, God no. I don't want people to feel like they're back in the SATs or something like that, or GMATs or whatever. No, that's part of the homework.
Follow up to that then. On
Yeah.
your sides, were you able to kind of to start doing essay questions before people were like, who the hell are you? Why are you doing an essay?
Yeah, that's a great question. Pretty early. And we started on a team-by-team basis. It's still rolled out. It's not actually 100% universal. We were certainly able to do homework really early. And we took it as a high-pass filter. There are a lot of engineers out there. There are a lot of brilliant engineers out there who you don't want as part of your team. One of the things you're hiring for is you want people who really want to be part of your team. We rolled out homework during that 6-month window. So in the first year of building out the team, we rolled out essay questions about a year after that. So we were already telling a pretty good story about what Etsy was. But I think most of you are in that same place as well. So, yeah.
How's your engineering team structure?
What?
How's your engineering team structure?
Sure. We actually just changed it slightly. But for most of the last 18 months, we've been a combined product dev org, which is engineering, product managers, and designers in a single org, broken up roughly around. There are 3 groups that are broken up roughly around different customer groups. So buyers and sellers being our, we're a 2-sided marketplace, and internal tooling, and then a sort of more of a floating pool that we call marketplace expansion, and they go after new products. And people sort of, bounce in and out of those groups. One of the things that we emphasize a lot is flow between teams. Everybody who comes in starts off on a 6-week rotation, working with 6 different teams, shipping 1-week-long products for them. It has a bunch of things. One, it increases your sort of social capital in the organization, because we run a high chaos organization. Knowing more people is useful. It also gives you a sense of who you might want to go work for. It also means that your engineering managers can't hire to solve a problem they have today, because they know they're not going to get that person for 6 to 7 weeks, which is useful, particularly when you're hiring quickly. So there's that. And then we recently just broke out infrastructure and platform into a separate team, so combining operations and our platform and core teams. I'm not sure I would recommend that. It was sort of the number of people in a room problem.
How many people in each team?
What?
How many people in each room?
In the small groups, the larger, it sort of varies. Infrastructure itself is 45 people. Operations is 18 of those people. We have a dev tools team. We have a platform team. So it breaks down. Generally on a given product, you're looking for maybe 8 folks, and an 8 is sort of the ratio we go for engineering and engineer to designer and product manager. I'm not sure that's a great ratio. It's just the ratio we've been able to hire to. Yeah.
So going back to when you realized that you were sort of on this trajectory and you were either locked into paying for bigger hardware, which would eventually run out.
Yeah.
Of course, when you made that switch to sort of go the distributed route and introduce a learning culture, it went seamless and smooth and nothing went wrong, right? I'm assuming that's not the case.
It's not the case.
So how did you knew that was coming? I mean, you've been around the block before. How did you sell that up?
Yeah. Selling it up is its own tricky thing, and I'm afraid I don't have as good answers for it as I could. I knew the board is the short version. And so this is what the board wanted, and so we were sort of double teaming the rest of the senior leadership. Like I said, I don't know if that's a scalable answer, but it worked for me.
I think that's
Yeah. Last question. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about the blogging culture that you've developed and how that got traction?
Sure. There are a bunch of different pieces of it, and apparently I'm supposed to wrap this up, so I don't know if I can go to all of it, but I'm going to tell you a story anyways. And I don't even know if it's a true story because I'm not actually into basketball. But a few years ago in Vanity Fair, Michael Lewis wrote an article about Shane Battier. And Shane Battier is a basketball, the article was the No Stats All-Star. And the idea was that every time he was on the court, his team members did better. And the phrase that Michael Lewis used for this was the spirit of generosity. And we tried to encode that. We have all the sort of your standard engineering values of high impact per engineer, and we've tried to encode over and over again this idea of spirit of generosity. And so that was the framework under which we started the blog. Obviously, the blog is a huge recruiting tool. We get a bunch of referrals from that. People come in knowing a lot about the culture. But the way we talked about it internally and the way we really believe it is that we're trying to make the industry better. We are evangelical in our thoughts about engineering. And the 2 things that we've done, it's really the 3 things. It's part of your job, and we will support you doing it. And like I said, it took a year before it started happening organically. It took a year of, I dropped out of a Russian literature degree to do this stuff, and it took a year of me writing, helping people edit. So finding someone who can do that until it starts turning over, I think, is key. But it still needs to be engineering led. You can't have your engineering coordinator, your cultural liaison, or your your developer outreach person, it has to be an engineering-led effort, or it never feels organic. So, all right, thank you.
So I wasn't sure exactly how I'd approach this, but I think you've given me a bit of a context here. Gawker, I assume most everyone in the room knows Gawker Media, a websites, and we launched a platform that all the websites run on, and the platform is actually open to anyone to basically start their own site. And the key thing here is that by building this platform, we're actually changing as a company. Gawker is a pretty straightforward media company, 8 sites, we hired writers, have a sales team, basically an operational technical organization. I've been with Gawker since I joined in 2005, so I think you can call me sort of the founding CTO, even though it was around for about a year and a half. But most of the time has been hiring technical people to support the writers in the sales organization. It's not sort of a product or technology first, or hadn't been a product technology first organization. I don't really think there's any reason to sort of go through the first years of that, but where we are now, or where it found us in the last sort of year and a half, is we're about where Etsy was, 25 people, 3 years ago? Yeah. The tech team is about 25 to 30 people. That's product, technology, design, the whole bit. Everything that's not sales and editorial. We're also, and I think you are all in New York, right? Yeah. Mostly in New York. Okay. We are a split organization. Half part of the technology team is in New York, and the larger part of it is actually in Budapest, which goes back to the early 2006, 2005, it was financially prudent to build out a team in Budapest. And the tech team was about 9 to 10 people, growing a little bit, shrinking a little bit for 6 years. And Budapest team has been a part of it all along. The reason I mention that is it's actually one of the challenges in terms of having a significant sort of a distributed team, not so much people being in remote locations, but we have 2 sort of large locations, and the gravity of the team is in both. And both sides have demands, basically, in terms of how to manage these teams. And this has basically been the thing that's been most challenging for me in terms of building out a culture. We've actually learned a lot, or I have personally, watching Etsy, in terms of what Etsy's doing, the kind of culture it's trying to build. In our change to moving to be sort of a platform, to moving to be a platform company, Gawker Media in its entirety has to change in terms of its culture. No longer approaching things from this sort of editorial sales first perspective on the world. And we're doing this, we're trying to pivot with 45 million unique readers per month already on the platform, building out all new technology, and getting the entire organization to sort of look at the tech and product team as the sort of driver of the organization. I'm literally in the middle of that right now. So I'm making a lot of mistakes. I hope I'm doing a few things correctly. So the things that, I actually don't want to repeat a lot of the stuff that you already said, because I'm pretty much in line with all of it. Want to be a learning first culture. Building an organization like that. Now, one of the things I would say at some level, since I've been there as a founding CTO, what's really interesting to me, I spent a lot of time the last 2 weeks thinking about it. I was on vacation in the Alps, cycling with the Tour de France, just because that's a good way to relax. And it's amazing when you move from one organization to another, in sort of responding to the demands of the organization. When I joined Gawker, it already had, I think, 14 sites at the time. Each site had at least one writer. Some of them had 2 or 3. Mark Wilkie was actually at Gawker at the time, Mark from BuzzFeed. And they already had an identity. They were already something. Then I come in as a CTO guy. I didn't even meet 90% of the writers on the for all these sites for months. They were in New York, but there was no office. There's not really much communication with them. There's pretty much communication with the founder, with the head of sales, with the head of operations, the company, the business operations. So we're very distributed, not a lot of knowledge of each other. And there were several issues at the moment I joined the company. I literally had to hire for those issues to solve these immediate problems. And that actually laid the groundwork for what the culture of the company would be for several years. And it was very reactive. I think that's probably not surprising. Responding to the issues that we have at the time. And that's basically what the culture was at the time. And what I've been looking to build out or alter is moving from that reactive culture to this learning culture. But the thing is, I came from another company, it's called Bolt. We were actually right over there below that water tower. And we went through the same process, but I actually built a team from scratch. And it was a little more of a learning culture at that time. And it was much easier to build. I hired from the beginning the people that I wanted in terms of this kind of culture, and the rest of the company was on board with it. Basically, we were all learning at the same time. Changing, not just Gawker, but also myself, because I have actually been living in this sort of reactive, solve problems for the editorial and sales team for years, but changing the way I approach things is actually huge. Because if I don't do it, I can't expect other people to do it. And you mentioned something like, you can say, I want to be a learning organization and this is how I want to do it, whatever it is. It doesn't really mean anything. You have to live it. So what I've been doing is, again, I'm making mistakes. I actually don't have answers. You actually have good examples of successes. But one of the things, what's that? It's all storytelling, yeah. Yeah, I need to learn the storytelling part. So I wanted us to move from being, we sort of had a pattern of releasing code every few days, a couple times a week. And I never actually really liked that. I always thought, I look at building a company out, and there are a couple smaller ones that I've been involved with before and during Gawker, where how do I do things when I'm with one other founder? We write code, we put it live immediately. We don't have layers of process and approvals and people between what we do and the actual servers. So I actually began building out an operational team that came with experience in terms of on the operations side of things. A constant, which is what you guys do as well, again, learning from it, Etsy. Always releasing code. So we've actually very much got this culture in place. We do about 30 to 60 releases per day. I also needed to revamp the platform because the way the company had grown in the past was I had an API work developers basically in the US, front-end developers in Budapest. It was literally a PHP team in Budapest, a Java team in New York. And they basically did not work with each other in terms of writing code. Throughout the platform, built it from the ground up. Trained everyone, made it something that everybody basically had to experience. Identified a few people who learned first, and then they actually were involved in training other people to train up on the new technology and to build it. And from that, with building the platform and this new technology, we introduced these principles of constant releases. This is not a hard and fast rule, but eliminating branching in Git is a big part of it. Anytime it actually just happened 2 months ago, or actually about a month ago. A project, somebody was like, I can't figure out how to actually implement this new code through the process and have it go live without breaking everything. So they branched, and then it took about 2 weeks worth of work, 3 to 4 weeks to figure out how to actually merge that branch back in to get it live, as opposed to dealing with and learning how to do it without branching. And to me, this is all about, instead of spending more time day to day, managing the process of how I write code, it's write code and solve problems. Some of the things that I'm dealing with now are, you again have already touched on it, carving people's time out. Paul, you asked about meetings. We have the meeting problem. I especially have the meeting problem. I think I'm in about 6 or 7 per day. But by saying to people, you need to take 20% of your time and learn whatever, take it to yourself, learn, or for yourself, and learn how to, new technologies, new whatever strategies for solving problems, it never happens. It never happens on its own. We literally have to schedule a day. It's your Mondays thing. I do it on Fridays. We actually may be changing that based on the experience that we have. But we're trying to basically carve out time for people to think, to basically use their brain, as opposed to being stuck in kind of, here are tasks that I have to do day to day. Yeah, I'm not really sure how much more I can actually get into, but I think it'd be good to open it up to questions, because I think the main thing for me is we're in the process of doing what you were doing 2 years ago, and moving from sort of that operational organization to a learning organization. So I might have something interesting to offer up. Yep.
Git repos do you maintain?
Pardon me?
How many Git repos do you maintain? The idea of not branching is kind of...
2.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on writing smaller things and stitching them together?
Generally, I think it's a good practice, but again, these rules about not branching, they're not necessarily hard and fast. It's kind of, what I was trying to get people out of is thinking that that's the thing you do by default. I'm about to start writing something new, create a branch, write it, merge it back. I want the opposite. Think about how to not do it. And then if you can't, and it's entirely possible that you can't figure out a way to do it, go ahead and branch. So it's not about hard and fast rules, it's more of a cultural change in terms of how people practice writing code day to day.
We have values for the horizontal branches in our Git repo.
Oh, nice, I might introduce that. I like that one.
If you write smaller things, then you find that most people don't have that problem.
Yeah.
And those branches can just be easily merged in. At Node.js, we have about 200 Git repositories that all rely on each other. And
Yeah.
because the module system of the underlying platform is actually makes that very nice, that's a very simple problem to solve. That's why.
We may move toward that, but part of like eliminating the old platform, we had a whole server infrastructure in place, and if you actually saw the model of it, there's a great picture, both physically of what our data center looked like, and also what everything looked like logically, and you could see how we were solving problems as they came up. So we went through this process of just trying to eliminate everything, get down to a couple primary repos. We've completed that. I mean, literally like 3 weeks ago, all servers have been turned off, all the old equipment. Moving forward, you'd absolutely see us approaching things a little differently. And that's definitely open.
If you're releasing 30 to 60 times a day,
Yep.
how does QA fit in that?
The QA is the development team, product
They QA
team.
themselves?
Yep.
They QA each other's work? Or-
Yeah, they do. Yeah, they do. It's pretty constant. It's the challenge that we have. It's actually it's a Scala platform, so the JVM it's not quite the same as like releasing PHP, straight out. But the developers themselves are the ones who are expected to QA their work.
Could you give a sense of the history of your development methodologies and how they've changed, if at all?
Yeah, they've changed quite a bit. We do, again, with a distributed team, the thing that we've actually gotten better at is we do more pair programming. Obviously, people who are in each office, it's simple for them to sit with each other and do that. What we're trying to introduce now is the remote and local. We have a 24/7 video feed in place between the two offices, so it's literally set up in the middle of the room, and you just walk up to the screen and call somebody up. And we have it set up, the same setup in sort of a more private area, and we're testing having these developers in both locations sit down and do the same thing together. You can obviously do that on the desktop as well, but the key thing to me has always been the quality of basically the video, real basic stuff. And a lot of the desktop technologies just aren't that great, like Skype. It kind of sucks, actually. So what people were doing for a while was they'd have an IM window open, chat, do pair programming. Doesn't work as well as you sit there and just talk to each other. So we use this, it's a Cisco 24/7 video thing that they will use. But I'd say like the thing that's changed the most is how most of the developers write code. Virtually everything they do is sort of, at least at the code level, it's branched. You know, it's switched on or off before they put it live. And that's how they will commit, they'll add a new feature, commit it, and pull somebody else in, another developer in, to actually look at the feature that they're building and do the code review at the same time. But it's basically organically evolving, with the pair programming being sort of the one thing that I think is sort of standard or expected in most organizations. But it's changing a lot with day-to-day, with experience, successes and failures. Yep.
Prior to what you're about to implement for the peer programming, how have you been managing the Budapest team in terms of, your expectations for what they're producing? I mean, it's the equivalent of just, someone working from home. If one of our companies were to hire someone and they were going to work from home, what's the best way to make sure that they're actually getting their stuff done without looking at every single line?
Yeah, well, from the beginning, I actually, in January 2006, I hired, met one person through a proxy, through a party. Met a nice guy at a party. He's got to be great. Actually met him, it turned out he was great. I went to Budapest to meet him and hired 3 other people part-time. And we literally rented an office. So all of them came into the office together. And that first person I hired that I worked with is the one who basically managed the office. There was a point like 3 years ago, he's a developer, he's not really an office manager. There's a point where things got too big and I actually had to hire someone else to manage the office. But we use standard like Jira, Asana, and group chat tools, talking all the time. With that, when we were smaller, with that guy in Budapest, we have 10, 20 conversations per day all the time. And I spoke to the other developers a little less because he tended to work through them. But now that the organization's bigger, we have the office manager there. I actually have 2 people in the ops team in the Budapest office, a couple people in New York. And this person is actually the head of the development team in the Budapest office. Although I do have a VP of engineering who all the developers report up to him, and he's in New York. But a lot of responsibility is pushed off to them. And this is actually one of the things that we as Gawker as a company has to learn. For years it was sort of, I want some feature, whatever it is. A gallery should work this way. And then the idea and the specification, everything would be given to a developer wholly formed, with not really any room for a developer to think about how to do stuff. I know, I was a developer for a long time. That is not fun. Like, I want to solve the problem. And so what we had in the past is developers would try to solve, or their creativity would come out in the code, which is usually when another developer comes along and can't figure out what the hell's going on because something really creative was done. This is part of what I'm also trying to change, or have been changing in the company, that we give less of an idea. Like say if it happens to be like a gallery, we need a gallery, and here's a couple high-level specs, but why don't you guys take it, come up with a solution? And I try to, it depends on the size of the project, have a person, if it's a development, 3 of the developers are in Budapest, try to have 1 person in New York on that project as well. And I didn't actually mention this earlier, but I found this is really important with 2 sort of large offices. We regularly take people back and forth. So I just had 3 guys from the Hungarian team just left on Friday. 3 more are coming next month. The entire US team is going to Budapest in September because the face-to-face, absolutely critical when you have that sort of presence. Because too many, you've gotten emails or you sent them where people misread what you've written. It happens all the time. So I find the personal stuff is critical. Yeah. One more. Yeah. One more, right?
How does that change the value proposition of having a team that doing all that travel?
It changes it a little, but not that much. I've been trying to add to the New York team, engineering team. I do want to have a significant presence here. It's just not easy. So we have to we're looking around the country, but even in Budapest, we're extending our search for people to other countries, Romania in particular, and where people will actually move into the Budapest office. But it's still a good culture, and I just like having these guys and the sort of distributed team. I think it's a valuable thing to have. All right, sorry.
So at HuffPost, I ran product design and engineering, and I did that for the HuffPost Media Group at AOL. So I now am CEO and founder of RebelMouse. We are 37 developers on that team. Sorry, I've been losing my voice. 4 designers. We're reaching 6.5 million uniques in the last 31 days, about a year out of launch. So I was thinking that I would talk about the things. You have to take it with a grain of salt, okay? I'll talk about the things that I think I did differently at HuffPost, that we did differently at HuffPost, that I've grown to embrace more and more every day and week and year. And I'll just take it to an extreme and then just dial it back, and don't apply anything to yourselves that's inappropriate, please. So I can't help but notice the demographic of this room, and it's scary. So I think it is important overall that we try to think a little different from each other, since we all are exactly the same demographic. It's scary. I think the first one where I get fairly radical compared to the convention, and I'm not alone on it, is deep embrace of distributed teams. 9 out of 10 of my team at HuffPost was all around the world. I used to be a lead developer. The number one reason to make distributed teams work, in my opinion, is that everyone always wants you to pull an all-nighter. But I like sustainable teams that stay together for years, and not just, oh, I burnt out my star and we got 6 months of him, but then he hated us forever and never came back. Which, as a lead developer, I always felt that, the pressure of when can we deliver. So the number one biggest advantage is when the team's together, I try to give us the weekends off, but every hour of the day and night, there are people working. So that at 8 p.m. I can have an idea, and at 8 a.m. I wake up and we're looking at the beta instance URL of it, and the baton passes, because that person, I don't like it when people have to work at night. So I'm an insomniac and I work at night, and I don't mind if someone has a weird schedule and never comes in before noon because they're always up till 5 a.m. But when you can get a team that truly passes the baton between each other, it's pretty amazing what starts to happen. In order to do that, so I have I've realized why am I doing this is in part due to my childhood. I was born in Mexico, my dad's American, my mom's Mexican, and the Mexican side of the family was very close to me, even though I was living in California. So I'm predisposed. I've learned to be close to people who are far away since I can remember. And so there are 1,000 different cues to be able to read an email the way you read body language or a chat. I try to keep all decisions around product and tech executions. For me, I hate meetings. I hate them. Every meeting we do at RebelMouse is external. It's meet with partners. It's meet with clients. That internally, I want asynchronous decision making. So I have empowered people who know I have their back. We've worked together so long, I trust 90% of their decisions. They know 10% of the time at least I'll be really annoying and have an opinion on them, but that annoying process tends to make things better overall. So the second most powerful reason for distributed teams is the recruiting. If you have to look within a 20-mile or 50-mile radius of here, it's really, really hard. I have guys in Argentina and Chile, Sri Lanka, Spain, Ukraine, Russia, Philippines, and one of my best ever was is in Turkmenistan. Incredible dude, and the Turkmenistan army called him to duty, which was unfortunate. So recruiting is way easier. The cost to put a scalable team together is crazy different from when people have to live in the most expensive place in the world. And so the people that I look for love ideas. So here's my next more sort of radical thing, which is that product groups and product people are sucking oxygen away. And oxygen is the creativity that keeps a developer loving their job versus liking their job. And so I triply believed it after going through AOL, where for me the right ratio of product to developers is maybe one product person per 50 developers. AOL was like 8-to-1 the opposite way. And I was like, well, there's 8 of you telling this one dude what to do, and how is that supposed to work? And so it only works to have this attitude towards product groups and product titles if your recruiting efforts are obsessed with finding the developers that love to do product and are good at it. You know, not everyone's good at product. It's the hardest thing to be good at. But I do find that the best at it are the developers and at HuffPost, the best editors. And that when they were able to just collaborate without anyone in the middle taking notes and saying that they would put a timeline and a project plan and all this shit, when they could just get together and get things done, it was amazing. And so the developers who can handle it at RebelMouse are on the distro list that customers email to. They will answer emails occasionally, but they're very in tune to all the incoming that's coming from our top partners or our top clients and users, et cetera. And so it doesn't mean that you shouldn't have any product people, but at HuffPost we didn't. We didn't have one person with a product title, and it worked incredibly well for us. The next things are the things that, like, the scalable organizations is just, and this isn't radical, but it's I learned a lot from sort of Ken Lear and Eric Hippo are sort of yin and yang and how they approach the world. And so from Ken is this gut intuition about product and what to release that's going to move the needle, and just obsessed with being able to helicopter in to fix that one place that is going to change things significantly, which always exists, and I believe in it strongly. And Eric Hippo sees things in this sort of how do you move from scrappy to scalable, which is a really interesting, an interesting challenge. Because if you overdo it, scalable can become mediocre. And so how do you keep your edge? How do you stay scrappy, but deal with hyper growth? And so one of the things that was extremely useful for us was to just put the big bubbles of what mattered most to the business together, and then look at the talent that we had and the way people work together and regroup around exactly those buckets. The more you have people who feel like they own something that they can hold on to and tell their husband or wife and parents, et cetera, this is what I do, I think the more that it comes together, that they take it in a good direction. So at HuffPost, we had one group just around social integrations, all the APIs. Every time there was a meeting with a Twitter or a Facebook, what can we do that's new and cool? We had one group that was focused on editorial efficiency. So anytime an editor was like, I have to click here, 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 and here, and it's so fucking annoying, that group would race on it. And then a group for like user-facing stuff. The photo should be bigger, the this, the that. There's so much around that. And that really helped us move. The next thing that really helps to stay fast and scale is a wiki-like roadmap. I'm obsessed with speed, and anyone or any process who I feel like is slowing things down drives me crazy. It's like I have an allergy to that. And so we had a lot of, just to be totally honest, we had a lot of tension at HuffPost until between edit and it was internal, it was healthy sort of tension, but it was tension and it was unnecessary. Especially as we grew. So we had an editor, a managing editor come, and his was like, I can't see what you guys are doing I don't know when to expect what. And sometimes, the most annoying thing to me was when a developer would have a particularly inspired night and release and have some amazing feature that nobody was planning, but they just got obsessed. And that actually this would exaggerate tension in the company. Why did we work on that? I didn't say that was the priority. What's going on? And it was like soul killing to the star developer who had this inspired night. And so I wanted to create buffers around it. What works really well is an open roadmap that anyone in the company has access to, that everyone has access to, and that you maintain as you go forward. So we would do screen grabs of everything that went live and add it to the live page. And this thing would scroll for fucking ever. It was like crazy. We would occasionally go and archive. But then once a week, we could send the email, look at everything that went live. Because the things that are going to go live are probably iterations off what went live. And then the roadmap of everything we're doing, which was so exhausting to look at, was there. And then, to be honest, very few of the people who complained that they wanted visibility into the roadmap actually really wanted visibility into the roadmap. So once it was there, then I could say, listen, you have the opportunity to keep up. And if you want to keep up, you can do that. It's all there. But you can't tell us to slow down. So you can dive in, you can affect things, you can have ideas. And I think that message across many different parts of the organization was very effective because it was open and it was transparent, but everyone understood that it couldn't get slowed down. That's it. Questions? Yes?
Who conducts the interviews?
The interviews?
You've got people all over the world.
Oh, we've gotten better and better and better at that. I think it was an art at HuffPost and has become a science at RebelMouse. There's a lot of cues when you do distributed teams. So the tiniest little example is that I'll know, or my CTO is in Kharkov and he's genius, he's so good. And so we've developed together these types of things, like for example, you might know the developers in Philippines, so you do a quick thing. You don't want to ask them to be on to do a first interview at 3 a.m., but you calculate the time zone roughly and then say, hey, can you talk at 10 a.m.? We'll do a Skype chat or a Google chat or whatever. And if they ask you to translate the time zone stuff for them, then it's over. It's like, I need you to figure that shit out. It's the most available information in the world. So, but we've gotten more and more, and we always do trials. Like, it's no matter what your life situation is, if you don't, I don't mean free trials. When you deal with the international world, there's so many assholes who are abusing them that you need to give them every cue in the world that you're real. And one of those is that it's a paid trial. So we'll figure out hourly rate and monthly retainers and and say, okay, 40 hours is paid. And that will be something between $400 to $1,000 that's guaranteed to them. And then some people have really intense jobs, and so it's going to take them a month to use those 40 hours, and that's fine with me. We can be patient for really awesome people. They can work on the weekends and evenings. Some people get obsessed, and they have a really hard job, but they're going to spend the whole weekend working on this and prove it. It's the next step. But paid trials are vital, I think, for this to work. And you have to drop out, you have to give very specific tasks, because it can't be like, here's this huge new exciting project. For a trial task, it has to be something that one of your great people could do in 4 or 6 hours. And you give them 10 to 20 because they have to learn your environment, they have to get who you are, and then you just don't keep okay people. You don't even keep great people, you keep awesome people. And that's how it really flows. Yeah.
So, I mean, we run a completely distributed team.
Awesome.
So,
woohoo.
The big problem for us is how do you get past the +8, +9 hour time difference between two people? So async is a big part of that, but it's still, I had a guy that worked for me in Australia, and he never got on sync with the guys in San Francisco just because, it was just different times of day every time. And so I had these two awesome people that could never get in sync, and I couldn't find a good way to get around it.
Yeah, I think we have an advantage in New York for globally distributed teams. San Francisco's 3 hours the wrong way for almost every scenario. And Australia's really hard. So my quick recommendation is maybe they don't have to be paired together if possible. But the other one is that you try to enforce to them that this is a really cool opportunity, and that if you just slightly shift it so that you have an hour of overlap and become a little more of a morning person, and you become a little more of an evening person, often when they realize that the hours will net out and et cetera, then they can mesh for the parts they really need to, but then they start picking it up from email, et cetera. But there are some that are exact time zone differences that you actually need someone in between that they both talk to, and then it starts to flow.
We ended up doing that with Europe, so
yeah.
That sort of feels
Yeah.
like that, so.
Yeah, because then that Australia time zone can be amazing for you, because that's part of the scalable, sustainable life, is that something starts to go wrong on a server chart. They're not looking at that anyway. It's not wait until it's actually hitting Nagios alerts and phone calls.
Is everyone English speaking in your team?
I demand that English is the thing that, but grammar I'm very loose on. It's the exchange of ideas,
One question.
Yeah.
If you were putting together the roadmap, the open roadmap,
Yeah.
what was underneath that? So what was the mechanism that you're using and the practices you're using to really populate that as far as tasking and development was concerned?
Well, I'm trying to answer it concisely, so.
I'm trying not to say.
Yeah.
Obviously you're doing Agile. Are you doing Scrum? Are you putting stuff in Jira? Do you have people
So at RebelMouse we use Redmine, and every line of code is attached to Redmine, and we use GitHub, and I like that. We go very near the line of chaos, but there should never be one line of code ever you come that you can't understand why, because it's always attached to tickets. And so that is the sort of thing that keeps us from all the way into chaos. I actually actively dislike Agile. I think it's a great adjective. If anything, I endorse more of lean, but to be honest, what I find is that overdoing it with methodologies, you actually are better off seeing the humans you're working with. So some hate being involved in this type of meeting and this type of discussion, and it makes them want to rip their hair out and strangle everyone in the room. And so you don't force them to. Others are like, why can't I be there? I should be there. And so I tend to flex towards the moment we're in, So sometimes you break rules and just take it live. Just do it. It's okay. Just take it live. And sometimes it's no, go through the processes. And so I like it to be a lot more loose. And so waterfall and RUP, I really, 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 really hated. And Agile, I kind of dislike a lot.
And Scrum's the devil.
And Scrum's the fucking devil. But you have to do what works for you, you know? So it's just, this has worked for me as long as then I have very close ties with board and executive to make sure we're prioritizing right, that things can flow loosely.
My cheeks got very hot. Why the fuck is Scrum the devil?
Sorry, no, sorry. I think it's all personal. I've been learning that from Kenny lately, is that the myth is, well, the myth is that these are business decisions and that there's such a thing as business. It's all personal. And so it's what's going to work for you and how it works for your team. And so it's probably just because of X personality deficiencies on my side.
I think it's a lot of it is more, I mean, for me at least, it's you come to start, what you're managing is the process over product and people and things like that. Actually, that to me is the wrong approach. And so to say, it's not necessarily that Scrum is the devil, but if your goal is Scrum, it's not people. That's pretty much what it is. So it is about what's the organization, what's the personality of the organization. And so when you asked about this earlier, pair programming on my team, not everybody does it. It just doesn't work for some people. It's better to sort of write on my own, hand it off to somebody else, and put things live. But for others, I prefer, and as far as I'm concerned, let them work that way.
Yeah, that's a good example. There are sometimes like this duo and they just want to go take a project together and they love it, and then you apply it to someone who's like, oh my God, I have to listen to him breathe for 3 hours?
Even over the
And one of the scalability hacks about finding what works for individuals is at some point you have to start clumping people and treating them as units rather than as individuals, which is unfortunate, but the reality. And clumping those people by how they work rather than other types of ways of grouping them, skill level, or background, or sort of interest, or those sorts of things. So we have lots of different teams that work and sort of at least track their work and talk about their work and estimation in very different ways than other for Scrum. But yeah, because at some point it can't be about the individuals, at least for the senior leadership.